dipping in the polls, Vladimir Putin is in the spotlight as millions go to the polls to elect a parliament. But will it also be a test of his popularity? Will Russia's strongman maintain his influence in the Duma as he seeks to become president for a third time? Or are Russians finally tiring of United and Putin? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to Inside Story. I'm Stephen Cole. It is the biggest threat to his 11-year rule to date. Russians headed to the polls on Sunday to vote in national parliamentary elections. And despite marginalization of opposition groups, it's expected that Vladimir Putin and his United Russia Party will lose their two-thirds majority in parliament. Only 7 parties were allowed to field candidates this year, and the loudest opposition groups have been silenced. But with widespread corruption among officials and a growing gap between rich and poor, are Russians tiring of Putin's leadership? So let's take a look at the man who has become the face of 21st century Russia. In the year 2000, Vladimir Putin was elected as president. In the first 8 years, he presided over the longest economic boom Russia has seen for decades. And this was largely due to high market prices for oil. In 2003, a general election saw Putin allies take control of parliament. He sought to reduce the powers of the business tycoon dubbed the oligarchs. And in 2006, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, Russia's richest man, was jailed for tax evasion. In 2007, he compared US foreign policy to Nazi Germany. He threatened to target missiles at EU states in response to US anti-missile plans. Unable to run for a third term in 2008, Putin became prime minister, a position usually secondary. Putin remained the dominant figure alongside his protege, Dmitry Medvedev. And in 2011, he announced that he would once again run for president in 2012 with Medvedev as his prime minister. For more on all of this, we have our guests in London. Alexander Nekrasov, a former Kremlin advisor and author. In Moscow, Masha Lipman, a political analyst at the Carnegie Moscow Center. Also in Moscow, Ivan Safranchuk, deputy director of the Institute of Contemporary International Studies. And welcome to you all. But first, let's go to Masha Lipman. Masha, these elections will decide the shape and the form of the Duma for the next 5 years. Are the elections, though, likely to have a significance beyond the lower house?
I would say yes. I would say these elections are, or at least the atmosphere and the environment around this election is different from the previous one. There's nothing new about elections having preordained results and being heavily manipulated by the Kremlin. However, this time around, the election is especially manipulated, and the manipulation is especially shameless. In response to it, there is a growing public defiance, at least among the urban advanced constituencies. The more shameless the manipulation and the violations, the higher the defiance. So much so that it's become trendy in these circles, in the circles of urban, modernized, advanced Russians, to discuss how better to defy the government. Should we ignore the elections? Should we come to the poll and take the ballot and not cast it, take it home with you? Should we vote for somebody, not the United Russia, not the chief pro-Kremlin force? Should we tear the ballot? This is the trendiest, the latest I heard. Tear the ballot right there in the polling station. The government is indeed shameless this time, and this combination of growing shamelessness on the one hand, growing defiance on the other, may indeed define the effect of this election beyond the election day, which is today, because it signals the somewhat weakening legitimacy of the current regime. We're not talking about critical mass. We're not talking about this regime really on the way to a dissolution, but weakened legitimacy is a problem to the Kremlin.
Ivan, is it likely the voting public will take this opportunity to send the Prime Minister a message? Is a vote for United a vote for Putin as PM and again next March as President?
I understand that the majority in Russia does support the current prime minister and the future president. Mr. Putin does enjoy a lot of public support, and this public support is going to manifest itself in these elections and in the presidential elections in March. So I think it's very difficult to doubt that Vladimir Putin himself is extremely popular in Russia, and the majority does vote for him, which, by the way, does not paradoxically means that what has been said before is not true. It is very much true.
The bit about shameless manipulation, I mean. But Alexander, is Putin still the most popular strongman politician in Russia?
Well, I would say that Putin has no competition, because the opposition in Russia is not really united. I don't really see anybody charismatic enough and interesting enough to attract attention. We have some people among the opposition leaders who are actually going back to the times of the Yeltsin regime at the end of the 90s, which were actually shameful 90s. For some reasons, the opposition says in Russia that these were the democratic times. They were not. I was an advisor to the Kremlin, and I can tell you there was no democracy. It was a robust state, and the oligarchs were basically doing whatever they wanted. And when people say that Putin has tightened the grip over Russia when he came to power the first time as president, basically he inherited a country which was run by groups of big businessmen who were doing whatever they wanted. So to be honest with you, I don't really think that we can talk about sort of fiddled elections and no democracy at all. It's a difficult situation. Russia has been under communism for 74 years, and this poison, it's still working. So Putin has a mountain to climb. He has obviously no opposition leaders who can compete with him, and obviously he will win. But this election today, the United Russia Party will not get as much votes as it did before, simply because it's been in power for too long.
Masha, have there been any election issues worth talking about in this election?
Well, elections in Russia are not about issues. Elections in Russia are about maintaining the monopoly on power. The 90s may not have been indeed a time of mature democracy, and it would have been really bizarre if after over 70 years of the communist rule, we had a democracy overnight. However, 90s were about diversity, and it was about competition. And it was about not just effective, but irreconcilable opposition to the president, to President Yeltsin, and the Duma was dominated by the opposition. Now, what we have today is a monopoly on power, which is being reinstated and maintained and perpetuated with every next election. Last competitive election that we had was 1999. This is why elections in Russia are not about any issues. People who vote for the pro-Kremlin forces, people who vote for Vladimir Putin will vote for Vladimir Putin, vote for the status quo. People see a lot of drawbacks, a lot of policy failures, especially as far as corruption is concerned, as far as the abuse of police and government authority is concerned, and yet status quo is still preferable. There is a
doesn't the status quo, Masha,
change can only make things worse.
Doesn't that mean you're looking at stagnation, not growth? This is not a stagnation of the sort we had under Brezhnev. The situation is a great deal more dynamic and open compared to the Soviet days. We have a great deal more individual freedoms. This is not the way it was in the USSR time when private property is outlawed. So it's different, but there is definitely a political stagnation in the country. What about Ivan? There have been allegations of malpractice. Marsha, what did Marsha say preordained results, shameless manipulation. So allegations of malpractice. Russia's only independent monitoring group, Golos, has so far logged more than 5,000 complaints. That was even before election day. A website was taken down, the Golos boss was stopped at the airport, her laptop was taken off her. This doesn't send a very credible democratic message outside of Russia, does it?
It does not, and of course it's very important that the elections are properly monitored and there are no bad practices through the elections. However, at the same time, we see that the official authorities, they think they are quite sure that they are going to win, and they think that there are exactly people who want to make elections look bad. And that's why we have all these attacks on independent observers and allegations against them. I don't think that all that is going to contribute to the international taking of the elections, at least not in the very good way. However, I don't think that based on all this we can say that results of the elections are not illegitimate or something like that. I'm quite sure that the international observers will say something like elections are
a sham?
Are not. Well, they will not use as strong language as Masha did before, but I think already in the last 2 or 3 elections there was a sort of standard formula that elections were legal but not fair, something like that. So yes, there are problems with the elections, but everyone will admit the results of the elections, and I think that authorities will feel pretty legitimate.
Okay, Alexander, is that really the point, that all this is a process aimed at rubber stamping United and paving the way for Putin's return to the presidency in the new year?
Well, it's part of the process. I've been saying on Al Jazeera for the last 3 years that Putin is coming back. I could not understand why some analysts were saying that, it might not work like that Medvedev will stay on. It was crystal clear from day one that he will be returning. I don't think that even if the United Russia loses some seats, that it will impact on Putin's position. And as regards those violations during the election, the point is this. The local authorities are still very Soviet. And the level of corruption on the ground there is very high. Even if Putin orders all of those people not to do anything, not to interfere, they will still do it. They will still try to get the best results from every area and so on. So that is one subject that has to be dealt with in Russia, corruption. And I suspect that Putin, when he gets elected, will have to deal with corruption. Otherwise, Russia will not move forwards. It would be unable to do it.
Masha, do you second that? I'm just looking at a quote from Boris Nemtsov, who, as you know, is a deputy PM, former deputy prime minister, says United Russia has been unashamedly and impudently preparing to commit fraud on a national scale. Now, that's real condemnation from a former senior politician, isn't it?
Boris Nemtsov is a figure of the so-called non-systemic opposition, that is, those opposition figures and forces that are completely barred from the political scene, have been consistently marginalized by the Kremlin. His assessment may be indeed phrased in very strong words. However, I think they are generally true. What we're facing today is abuse of administrative authority. We are also facing harassment and pressure on activists, including those who try to monitor the election, some of them being barred altogether from monitoring. We also have, I would say, unprecedented cyber attacks at several prominent websites of radio stations, of newspapers in Russia. So I don't think the government feels as secure as some people would say. Actually, I think this is evidence of insecurity, and it's not just provincial officials, provincial administrators who try to over-exercise their authority in order to deliver the correct elections. It's Putin personally who tried to discredit on air in a public statement the Golos organization, which is is now being harassed and whose activists are being pressured. Putin was really critical of the operation and made it clear that he regards them almost as agents of foreign countries.
And Ivan, is it significant that the field is narrowing? I think as only 7 parties have been allowed to field candidates this time round, which is down from my count, 11 last time round. One, the People's Freedom Party, not even being allowed to take part. So what does Putin do? He only allows accredited parties to appear on television or to compete with him, does he?
Of course, let us say the political spectrum of Russia is wider than what is officially admitted as politics. There are activists, there are political figures who are excluded from the official political process. It is a very long story on which ground and why some people and some movements are excluded from the political process, but I think that the authorities do admit that some people are excluded from the political process, and they are going to continue this process, and they have plenty of arguments to justify this position.
So Ivan, what's the point of the election then? If you're anti-Kremlin or anti-Putin, or you openly criticize the Prime Minister, you won't get official recognition. And again, that's not sending a very democratic message, is it?
It is, but at the same time, we see in different countries practices when there are political forces who are excluded from the official politics and from the elections. In some countries, the political spectrum fully coincides with the official politics. In other countries, this gap is wider. But what we will see in these elections is that even those parties who are admitted for elections, not all of them will get into the State Duma. So let us be frank with this. The political spectrum in so-called street politics is wider and is not going to be represented. But at the same time, if all the parties do participate in the elections, as you suggest, most of them would not get into the Duma anyway. And the 4 parties actually cover the absolute majority of the population. That is also true. Whatever bad practices we mention, still the pure fact is that the majority in Russia does support the current leadership. And whatever attacks are on the current leadership, they do enjoy the majority. We may dislike it, as Masha correctly said earlier, in the urban developed areas. A lot of people do not like this, but this is the pure fact.
And Alexander, is that right? Even though there are quite a few parties who won't be taking part in these elections, who might represent people on the street, the overwhelming majority do in fact support the bigger parties that are represented or will be represented in the Duma?
Well, basically, they support the parties that they see, the ones that are on television, the ones that have proper election campaigns. So we can't really, judge what sort of marginalized small parties are there and who supports them. The key question here is, of course, how many seats the United Russia will get this time, and that's probably going to be analyzed by commentators who will say that is the reflection of the popularity of Putin.
And also,
Medvedev.
Alexander, it's key because of power over legislation. Can you explain that?
Well, yes, it might work like that, but obviously there will be other parties joining in. It's not like United Russia is alone there. They will have allies amongst other deputies. But I think everybody is watching the number of seats, not to the point of view of legislative process, from the point of view, but from the point of view of how it impacts on Putin, because that's the game here. And I think that the United Russia will not suffer a huge loss. So that everybody will conclude that Putin is on his way back and will win comfortably.
Masha, do you second that? I mean, is this really just all aimed at providing a vote of confidence for Putin towards next year?
Well, it is important that United Russia has a good showing in the election, and this is why we're witnessing the manipulation, this shameless violation of the rules. Putin, of course, will win a majority, and right now his approval rating in the polls consistently is around 67%, down some 11% from about 1 year ago, but still an enviable number for any leader in a democratic country. So he is sure to win. But United Russia is clearly on decline, and in the minds of many Russians, in fact, as many as over 1/3 of Russians, it is branded as a party of swindlers and thieves, a nickname that has been launched by a popular blogger, and the nickname stuck. And in a recent poll, way over 30% of the people said that this is indeed a fair characterization of this party. So this is quite something in terms of public opinion, I think, and the issue of legitimacy will remain, will be actually part of the environment in the years to come. It can certainly be remembered that the Soviet regime too was illegitimate in the minds of the people closer to the end of it. People made fun of it, they made jokes, they didn't respect the leadership in the least, and yet the regime continued to survive up until Mikhail Gorbachev started his reforms. So probably Russia can live with a regime whose legitimacy is weakened, but this is a fact to consider.
Ivan, this party, United Party, the party, as one blogger has described, as a party of thieves and swindlers. Do you see, even though Putin or United will get back, that it is a party in decline, Ivan?
Let us admit clearly that this is the ruling party. This is the party which has had majority already for over a decade in the State Duma. And this is the party which is going to keep the majority in the next Duma, and probably will participate in the next elections and also stand for the majority. So this is a sort of ruling party. And I think that this party is going to adjust to the situation. And we see right now that it is also adjusting. Yes, there are difficulties inside the party. There are discussions inside this party. But I don't think that we should take this party as something monolith and dogmatic. This party will follow this situation. It may be more social oriented in one situations. It may be more hardline in other situation. It may turn to the right or it may turn to the left. So it is going to adjust, and that's why I can't say that the trend of decline is predetermined. I on the contrary see quite a few efforts from the political leadership of the country to somehow encourage this party and to make it stronger, which does not necessarily work for the democratic process in the country. But I think that the party is going to adjust to the situation.
Alexander, do you see United as a future stronger party, or are there some signs of discontent, some winds of change perhaps appearing from the west or east?
Well, if we are talking about within the party itself, I don't really see any frictions there. I think that, you know, what we are usually missing is that we usually talk, keeping in mind the intelligentsia in Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe a couple of other big cities. You know, analysts in Russia and outside Russia don't really know how the regions feel about it and what the people think there. They probably have contempt for most politicians in the center. They probably feel sidelined and marginalized, and probably haven't felt, a lot of them, the benefits of capitalism, this gangster type of capitalism which developed in the 1990s. And I think that they are looking at this situation from the point of view, better the devil we know.
Indeed, better the devil you know. Russia will be looking towards March next year and the election of a president. Thank you to our guests in London, Alexander Nekrasov, and in Moscow, Marta Lipman and Ivan Safranchuk. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Stephen Cole. Goodbye.